Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim Daf Yud Zayin. So just to do a quick review of where we got up to, we started the beginning of the chapter with a list of all the people, situations where one might be in a certain situation, where if they do the avoda, if they do one of the, again, critical parts like Kabbalat Hadam, Zrikat Hadam, okay, they do that while part of the parts of the sacrifice, or halacha, then the sacrifice is disqualified. So what we did so far is we went through the zar, we did the onain. Okay, now we're up to the tvul yom. Okay, the next one's on the list of the tvul yom, the mechusar kippurim. So today we're going to talk about them, and then we'll get to the mechusar begadim. So now we're going to start with what's the source for tvul yom. What is a tvul yom? Okay, let's review. A tvul yom is someone who's impure. Could be impure for any kind of reason. Could be they're impure for the day. It could be they're impure for 7 days. But on the day that they're supposed to become purified, which could be the day they became impure, it could be the seventh day after, depending on what kind of impurity. They go to the mikveh. They could go in the morning, any time of day. And then they wait till after the sun sets. And only then are they completely tameh. So there's one thing they have to do, but that doesn't complete the process. They have to wait for the sun to go down. Okay. And then they can eat truma. Okay, now they can usually also eat sacrificial items at that point, but depending on what kind of impurity they have. For example, a zav and a zava, okay, or a metzora, they have a process they have to go through, which happens on the eighth day. So 7 days they do their purification process. On the seventh day in the morning, they go to the mikveh. They wait for sundown. Then they can eat truma, but they still have something left, and that's called a mechusar kippurim. That's someone who still needs to do a korban. So from the night of the seventh until the morning of the eighth, until they actually bring their korban, they're called mechusar kippurim. The main ramification is they cannot eat sacrificial meat, and apropos our Mishna, they cannot work in the temple. So some tvul yoms just wait till nighttime and then they can go do the work in the temple. But a mechusar kippurim has to wait till the next morning. But right now we're just talking about a tvul yom, but a mechusar kippurim will come up later, so I thought I would mention it now. Tvul yom inalan. Tanya says in a brayta, Rabbi Simai Omer, remez l'tvul yom. Okay, there's a lot who ask this question, why remez? It's just an illusion, right? A remez is there some sort of illusion rather than what's the source? Okay, and it's not actually a direct source, and perhaps that's why they call it remez, and you'll see why in a minute. But he asked, remez l'tvul yom she'im avad chilel minayin. How do you know that a tvul yom, if he did the avoda, that it is disqualified? Because again, it could be he can't do it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's disqualified. But again, the tvul yom is listed in the Mishna. What's our source? So here we have they asked the same question in a brayta. What's the source for this? Talmud lomal kedoshim yiyu v'lo yechalalu. Okay, what is this pasuk? So this pasuk is in Sefer Vayikra. When the kohenim are commanded, okay, there's the section in Parshat Emor, chapter 21 of Vayikra, where it says, tell the kohenim they can't become tamei to anybody they want. These are the only people they can become impure to. And then it says, pasuk hey, lo yikruchu korcha b'rosham u'pe'atz kanam lo yigalechu b'saram lo yisratu sarate. Okay, these are certain things. Some have to do with mourning practices. Don't mourn the way, others mourn by tearing clothes, things like that. Other things. And don't shave your peot, which also is a commandment to everyone, but this is a specific commandment to the kohanim. Okay. Without getting into all the gritty details of that pasuk. Okay, but there's certain things the kohanim are not allowed to do. Then it says, Kedoshim yiyu le'Eloheim. You will be sanctified to your God. V'lo yechalalu shem Eloheim. And you will not desecrate the name of your God. Ki et ishe Hashem lechem Eloheim hem makrivim vayu kodesh. Because they're doing the holy work of bringing the sacrifices to God. Okay, so what is this Kedoshim yiyu lo yechalalu? How are they going to desecrate? To which the Brayta says, Rabbi Simai says, now, the obvious would be, well, listen, you have to be sanctified. We talked earlier in the chapter, right? In other words, the first part of the psukim talked about the kohen not becoming impure to a dead body. And basically, this refers back to that saying. And if you become impure to a dead body and do the work in the temple, you're going to disqualify the work. But it can't be that. Why did nafik lemi v'yinazru? We already had that pasuk. Remember, it said v'yinazru mikotrei b'nei Yisrael v'lo yechalalu Hashem kodshi. Don't desecrate my name. And the next pasuk was, if you work in the temple and you're impure, then you get karet. And basically, the assumption is, right, the simple reading of v'yinazru, we took it to actually teach about Azar. Simple reading of that pasuk is it's also, right, even if you say it's talking about Azar, it's obvious from there that a kohen who's impure disqualifies the avoda, the work he does. So, can't be that. So, today when you're on the tvul yom, what's the closest to tuma? Tvul yom, right? It's someone who's, well, what's the difference between a tameh and a tvul yom? Well, the tvul yom has already gone to the mikveh. So, it's true, you still can't eat truma yet till nighttime, but you've somewhat purified yourself. Well, no. By the way, if you're a kohen and you do the work when you're a tvul yom, it's going to be the same status. And that's what they learn from this pasuk, Kedoshim yiyu v'lo yichalalu. To which the Gemara says, right? Someone who makes himself bald, or right pulls his hair out, or takes right or destroys the pay out of his zakan. Maybe what it's saying is a kohen who does that, who transgresses. Now, why would you suggest this? But let's just talk about it first. What the suggestion is: a kohen who transgresses the prohibitions in pasuk hey. That's what Pasuk Vav is talking about. Think about it. It talked about again. Don't become impure to the dead, which we already just said. It can't be talking about Tuma. And then it said, Lo yikchu korcha, and lo yishtu sarated, and those things. Maybe and then it says the next immediate thing is Kedoshim you. So maybe what it's trying to say is if you did any of those things, and then you did the avodah in the temple, well, God doesn't want your sacrifices. They're disqualified. So how do we know it's tvul yom and it's not those? Tvul yom de'imavad b'mita minalan. So they start with this quote from a sugya in Sanhedrin, which is, how do we know that it's tvul yom? If the tvul yom did the avoda, okay, again, they're not tameh, they're tvul yom, how do we know they get the death penalty? So they learn it from chilu mitruma. This is learned from a pasuk, the Vayinazru pasuk. Now we're assuming here tvul yom and tameh are kind of one and the same, which they're not really, but this sugya assumes they are. Okay, and Tosfot kind of asked this question, okay, because tvul yom, he says, doesn't really get mita. But anyway, I'm not going to get into Tosfot's question right now. Let's just stick with what it says in the Gemara. How do you know that tvul yom who does the avodah gets the death penalty? Or not death by the hands of God, by the way, not death penalty by the court, but death by the hands of God. Because it says, Vayinazru, right? Mikotrei b'nei Yisrael v'lo yichalalu, which the context there is impurity, which tvul yom is impure. And by truma it says, umetu bo ki yichalaluhu. By truma, what by truma? By an impure person who eats truma. In other words, what we're comparing now is an impure person who works in the temple and an impure person who eats truma. So because by truma, it uses the same language, an impure person who eats truma, chalalu, right? Lechalel. And by the impure person who goes into the temple and does work in the temple, which is our topic. And in the case where it says, in truma, it says, umetubo ki chalalu. You will get death by the hands of God. So therefore, it must also be a tvul yom gets death by the hands of God, or a tameh gets death by the hands of God. Okay, that's one from truma. Okay. So now they're going to say the following. From there we derive, de pasel b'truma machil avoda. De lo pasel b'truma lo machil avoda. Because the chilul is talked about in the tameh pasuk, and the chilul is talked about by eating truma. So they connect these, and they say the following. When it says, Kedoshim yiyu v'lo yichalalu, and they talk about chilul avoda, when we're talking about chilul avoda, it must be the same. If we're going to have to choose, it's going to be the person who also disqualifies truma by eating it, as we made this comparison between dealing with the kodshim and eating truma, and it's the same penalty. So we're assuming that when it talks about chilul and ruining the avoda, it must be talking about the same person who can also disqualify truma. And someone who does yikrichu korcha or pe'atz kanam yigalechu, all those, or yisrutu saratet, those people do not disqualify. They're not disqualified from eating truma. So basically, someone who will disqualify truma by eating it, right, and then basically makes it impure, that's the person who machil avoda, who their avoda in the temple will be disqualified. But if not, then not. And that's how we get to it's obvious it's a tvul yom and it's not someone who transgressed one of the things in the previous verse. Okay, that was our source. So we got a source. It was a little bit complicated to get to, but we got our source. Kedoshim yiyu v'lo yichalalu must be talking about a tvul yom. And that's because of inyan no inyan. Can't be talking about tame. We already have a pasuk by tame, so it must be talking about that. I'm a rabba. Rabba now asks. If we go back to the Mishnah, okay, and it's not in this order, but there's a tvul yom listed. The next one is mechusar kippurim, and later on it says tame also in our Mishnah. You can look back if you want. So Rabbi says, "Lamali dekata rachmana tame utvul yom mechusar kippurim." Like they're all very similar categories, and couldn't you just have assumed we could have learned one from the other? And now we're going to go through our classic. Why couldn't we learn one from the other, or why couldn't we learn from two of them to the third? Okay, we're going to do all those options, or not all, but a bunch. Tzriche. So we needed them. Why? Ikata rachmana tame shekeme tame. There's a chumrah in tame, and we saw this yesterday. A tame actually makes other people impure as well, or other items impure. So it has a certain, right, whereas a tvul yom or mechusar kippurim doesn't do that. So you couldn't have learned tvul yom or mechusar kippurim from a tame, because a tame person is much worse, right? And again, then you'd say, oh, that's why their work is disqualified, but doesn't necessarily mean the others is. So therefore, b'tful yom, what if you had tful yom? Mechusar kippurim lo atimine. So you couldn't learn mechusar kippurim from there. Why not? Shakem pasul b'truma. Because, and this is why I set up all the differences between tful yom and mechusar kippurim before, because a mechusar kippurim can eat truma. Because again, you can eat truma already the night of the 8th. Even though you haven't brought your korban, the relevance of the korban is only for the purposes of sacrificial items, like doing sacrifices, eating sacrificial meat. Okay. Mechusar kippurim. So what if you have mechusar kippurim? Maybe then you could learn tvul yom, which is an earlier stage, right? Well, tvul yom lo atimine. You couldn't have learned tvul yom from mechusar kippurim. Why? Because mechusar kippurim has a chumrah that tvul yom doesn't have. What is it? Shekem mechusar maaseh. A tvul yom is done everything they're supposed to do. They just have to wait for the sun to completely set. But a mechusar kippurim has to do an action. They have to bring a korban. So they're actually in a more, right, their position is more stringent because they actually have to do something to get out of it. So maybe you'd say, that's why their work is disqualified. The tvul yom just has to wait till nighttime. That's not so much that's left really. And maybe their work won't be disqualified. And that's why you needed all three. But now we're going to go, okay, michad lo ati. So it's true you couldn't learn from one to the other. But but maybe you could learn from two of them to one of them, right? You could have said, oh, let's go, right? Let's take two together because they don't all have the same chumras, or maybe they do. So now we're going to go through. Behelo lichtav rachmana. So which one? They're going to bring two possibilities here. They could have brought three, but they didn't. Maybe because the third one was obvious, it wouldn't work. Lo lichtav b'mechusar kippurim v'tete mihanach. Right? The obvious would be let's take tame and tvul yom. They're both, right, more severe than the mechusar kippurim, and we could have learned to the mechusar kippurim. But no, because malahanach, sorry, right. So actually, it's not such. This is the obvious one why it wouldn't work. My mistake. If you take the two more severe ones, right, you're not going to learn the mechusar kippurim because lo lichta, right, because malahanach shekem psulim b'truma. Those two are disqualified from eating truma, and the mechusar kippurim is not. So therefore, you can't learn from the two of them. Ella lo lichta rachmana b'tvul yom v'tete mehanach. This one's going to be a little more complicated, and from here we're going to tangent off into something completely different. So, and that's going to end this section. Okay, like I said, they don't give all three permutations, but why don't we just not write it in tvul yom, and you can learn from the tame and the mechusar kippurim. What's their right now? What are we going to say now? My parach malahanach shekem mechusarim maaset. Now, what would you say? Why can't we learn from those two to the third? Because they have a stringency. What's their stringency? They're missing an action, right? Just like we said, the mechusar kippurim can't teach you to a tvul yom. Also, the tamei can't because the two of them are missing an action. You have to go to the mikveh if you're impure. You have to bring a korban if you're mechusar kippurim. But if you're a tvul yom, right, you're done as soon as the night hits. So you have nothing that you need to do anymore because you've already gone to the mikveh. So that would be a good reason to say, right, that one's more lenient, and maybe that's why you couldn't learn from the two of them to that one. But but now they're going to reject this one. And then we're going to be back to, so then why can't we learn from the two of those? Sof sof klisha la tumatan. In the end, the tumah of mechusar kippurim, no matter how you look at it, is weaker. So you really could have learned from the two because the mechusar kippurim has that weaker tumah. Why is it weaker? Because you've already gone to the mikveh and you can already eat truma the night before, right? You're done at night. So you don't have any impurity on you anymore. You're just missing that you didn't bring a korban. But that's weaker, much weaker. Now, it's true you can't eat sacrificial meat, but it's clearly weaker than the tvul yom, and theoretically you should have been able to learn it. So to which they say, why did Rabba say these are all needed? Kasaval, turning out Amabet, mechusar kippurim dezav kizav dame. This is a whole new thing. We were talking about zav and zava, okay, and also, by the way, Rashi says in the same thing for a metzora. In other words, anyone who's mechusar kippurim, they, okay, they're basically saying Rabba, who said these are all needed, must hold that the tuma of a mechusar kippurim is basically like the tuma of a tvul yom from the day before. Now, this can't possibly be true. Okay, so what does this mean? Look at Rashi. Rashi says mechusar kippurim dezav kezav dami. It's on the second and third line in my Gemara anyway. Le'inyan kodshim. He says, okay, we're looking right now with kodshim glasses. Remember, there's two ramifications of this. One is truma and one is kodshim. Now, truma, you can already eat on the night of the seventh. Once night hits, right, you can eat truma. But you have to wait till the morning to bring your korban. So comes, what he's saying now is that if you look at, now, what are we talking about? What's our topic? A kohen doing the sacrifices. So we don't care about truma impurity as relates to truma. That's not relevant for our discussion. We're looking at this with kodshim glasses on. And as relates to kodshim, so Rashi says, Le'inyan kodshim, shelo hutar etzlo. And therefore, haveli ki'ilu lo taval, v'imachalo chayav karet. Okay, basically we're going to say, and im naga behem, okay, tim an limno behem rishon v'sheni. In other words, in the world of kodshim, now it's true they can eat truma, and there's no problem with truma, and they're not going to disqualify truma. But if they touch kodshim, they're going to make it impure. If they, in other words, even though they've gone to the mikveh, it's like a unique, a big chidush. You go to the mikveh on day 7. You wait till the nighttime. You can now eat truma. But if you dare to touch sacrificial items or work in the temple, right, or any of these things, your truma, you're like a tamei person, legamri, completely. Okay? That's what we're saying. And because of that, you don't say it's any weaker. It's weaker as relates to truma, but that's not our topic. We're talking about working in the temple. So you couldn't have learned from a mechusar kippurim and tamei to tvul yom, because really a mechusar kippurim is the same status as a tvul yom, and in addition needs to do an action to get out of his status. So basically, and so does a tamei, and that's why we can't learn from the 2 to the 3rd. So that could kind of end our discussion. But they're going to get off on a tangent from here. So that was our can't learn from 2 to the 3rd. Okay, the one they're missing, let's just go through. The one they're missing is tamei, is tvul yom and mechusar kippurim. You couldn't have learned to tamei. Okay, I don't know why they didn't bring that one up. It's a good question. Okay, you can think about it. Because theoretically, those two are lighter than the tamei. But let's see, what was our, right. They actually didn't talk about a chumrah that they have over the others, so I don't know why they didn't go there. Okay. Now the Gemara wants to suggest, okay, it's a good question. Someone asked after the Hebrew class yesterday, is this a difficulty? Is this a suggestion? Is it? So I think it's one of two things. It's definitely not a difficulty on Rabbah, but the Gemara is going to now either just suggest or maybe state it as if it's obvious, but then they're going to reject it. So it's either a suggestion that will be rejected or it's a statement that in the end is rejected. Mechusar kippurim dezav kezav dami tenahi. Okay, this is a machloket tanaim, whether mechusar kippurim is like a zav or not. Okay, so either, like I said, they can't raise a difficulty on Rabbah and say, how could you say that if it's a machloket tanaim? Because, okay, there's machloket tanaim. You could say, I hold by that side. And that's why either the Gemara is just pointing out, by the way, this is a machloket tanaim, or they're saying, maybe, like, let's learn this topic. Maybe it's a machloket tanaim, and look here, and I'm going to prove it. Ditanya. So here's the attempt to say this is a machloket tanaim. Sarfa onein. Okay, what's our topic? A para aduma. The para aduma We already learned it's not kodesh mizbeach, right? It doesn't have the sanctity of the altar, but it does have kodesh beta kabayit. That means anything that's not sanctified like the altar, it basically goes into the category of beta kabayit. Usually, and someone asked this last time, so I'm going to clarify it. Usually, beta kabayit is things for the upkeep of the temple, but it also just is everything that's not kodesh mizbeach. Now, the paraduma doesn't go on the altar. So it's kind of like in a weird category because it is a little bit more sanctified than other things. On the other hand, it's not kodesh mizbeach. But anyway, that's just a side point. If you burn the paraduma and you're an onain, okay, a kohen who's an onain, or mechusar kippurim, or you haven't done your korban on day number 8, kshira, okay, that's fine, no problem. Yosef Abavli Omiel, onain kshira. I have no problem with the onain, but mechusar kippurim psula. But the paraduma that was burned by a mechusar kippurim is disqualified. So now we have one opinion that says a mechusar kippurim who burns the para aduma, it's fine, and one who says it's not fine. So what must be the machloket? My love bahakami palge. Is this not the machloket? Now who has to burn the para aduma? Someone who's pure. So mar savar mechusar kippurim dezav kezav dame, or mar savar lav kezav dame. Right? If we're talking, this is the world of kodshim, right? So why did I mention beta kabayit, by the way? Because the reason why an onain can do this is because it's not kodesh mizbeach. Remember, an onain can't do the avoda in the temple. But first of all, this is done outside the temple. And also, it's not kodesh mizbeach. It doesn't go on the altar. So the onain is okay. But the mechusar kippurim, we have this debate. So what's the root of the debate? So they suggest the root of the debate is mechusar kippurim is like a zav. If you say it's like a zav, then you're going to say, basically, they're like a tamei person or a tvul yom. Tvul yom can't do the avoda. And although that's a little problematic because we're going to see they can. Okay, so let's get back to that soon. But if you say they're like a zav, let's just say we treat them like they're completely impure. Okay, so if they're like a zav, they're completely impure, then basically they can't do the right. They're going to disqualify it. If you don't treat them like a zav, you say they're not like a zav, then it's going to be fine. Okay, that sounds like the debate. But the Gemara rejects it. It says, "Dekule am kizav dami." Everyone agrees they're like a zav. Okay. And really, they're like a tvul yom. Okay? Now, what's the root of the machloket? I don't know if you remember this, but we've seen this about the paraduma, but we're going to see it again now. And it comes up a lot of times. Dichtiv vihiza hatahol. Okay, there's a pasuk in Bamidbar. Okay, we're in Bamidbar chapter 19. Okay, I'll read you the pasuk before. Verse 18. V'lakach ezov v'tabal b'mayim ish tahor. Okay, this is the process. They're going to take an ezov, then they're going to put it in the water. It's a hyssop branch. They put it in the water, in the pure waters. And then, right, this is the branch they're going to use to sprinkle the water on the person who needs purification. Now, who does this in the pasuk? Ish tahor. Okay? And then he's ala oel v'ala kelim v'ala nefashot yusham. So this ish tahor, meaning a pure person, meaning they can't be impure, takes the hyssop branch, they put it in, and then they sprinkle. Okay, fine. Next pasuk is v'hizah tahora latamei b'yom hashlishi b'yom hashvi. Now the next pasuk is telling you when did they do this? On the 3rd day and on the 7th day. But it says, and the pure person sprinkles on the impure person on day 3 and on day 7. Now that's totally unnecessary. All you would need to do is v'hizah b'yom hashlishi b'yom hashvi, right? Or hizah latamei. But why does it say hizah tahor? We know he's tahor. We already learned he was tahor. So this is a huge debate between the Prushim and the Tzdukim. Remember this, you'll remember it because it's kind of one of these big debates they have. If not, you'll remember it now. The Tzdukim said, okay, the person who does the paraduma, clearly it says tahor again, it says tahor, right? It has to be a tahor person, completely tahor. Come the rabbis and they say, the Prushim, why does it say, right, here's the drasha, why does it say tahor again? So now we're going to read this inside. Tahor, that's the one in the second pasuk in 19. Why does it repeat tahor when it already said tahor? Michlal shu tamei, a very radical thing, and that's why the tzdukim are totally against this. From here you can infer that why they add this tahor, well, he's tahor, but not completely tahor. Okay? Now what does it mean? You have a tamei person? So limed al tvul yom shekasher b'parah. They taught about a tvul yom. They learned from here that someone who already went to the mikveh but isn't yet, they're not completely pure, but they're almost completely pure. That person can do paraduma. Now, this was such a big debate between the Prushim and the Tzdukim. It doesn't talk about this here, but we've learned this elsewhere, and we'll see it in other places. such a big debate that they made sure every time they did the paraduma, they did it with a tvul yom because they wanted to show that we're right in our opinion, and they wanted it became this big debate between them. So basically, that's the machloket here. So what does that have to do with it? Okay, so now that's not the machloket, that's just the building blocks. So right now, what we have is everyone agrees that mechusar kippurim is like a zav, meaning they're kind of like a tvul yom, and everyone agrees that a tvul yom, everyone here in our sugya agrees that a tvul yom can do the avodat haparah. But what's the debate here? Mar saval tuma de kola Torah kula, umar savar tuma de hach parasha. So, what tvul yom were we talking about though that can do the paraduma? Any tvul yom, if right, you could be a tvul yom for all sorts of reasons. You could have touched a sheretz, you could have become impure to a dead body, you could have had something in your body like a zav that makes you, or a zava that makes you this status that because of that you're impure. So there's so right, you could be a nida. There's all sorts of reasons. So now he says the following: what kind of tvul yom is referred to in this pasuk? So the person who says, if a tvul yom here, right, or a mechusar kippurim, sorry, mechusar kippurim was clearly in the category zav, zava, those kind of people, mitzora. Those kind of people are a tvul yom. They can do it because what kind of tvul yom are we talking about? When it said a tahor, it means that's the first mar savar. Tuma de kola Torah kula. Any kind of tuma. It doesn't matter which tuma. But mar savar, the one who said a tvul yom, this mechusar kippurim can't do it. Why not? Tuma dahach parasha. The tuma of a tvul yom that we're going to allow is only a tame who's like this section. What is this section? Well, this section is all about someone who became impure to the dead. So it's only someone who became impure to the dead. And maybe from there we could get to other ones. We're going to see right now. Hilkach, get rid of the word onein. Okay, the Bach takes it out. It doesn't make sense. Onein is here. Hilkach tvul yom de tamesheretz de kile atu bakavachomer mi tvul yom de me. Now, if you became tummy to a sheretz, it's much lighter than a tumat made. It's 1 day purification process. You just go to the mikveh, you're done. Very simple. But you wait till the nighttime also. But a tvul yom of sheretz will also be included here. So a tvul yom of me and include in that a tame of sheretz. Avam mechusar kippurim de zav de chamir. But a mechusar kippurim of zav is much more severe. Why? Because they have to bring a sacrifice to get out of their impurity. So and the truth is they give a different reason really, but it's chamor because shekein tum'ah yotza lav migufo. Okay, I just made that one up about what I said, the severity. But what the Gemara is saying is the tuma comes out of the person's body. That's more severe than a sheretz fell upon you, or you touched a sheretz, or you touch a dead body, or you touch a person who is impure to a dead body. Right? That's already tuma's coming from something external. When it's coming from internal, it's much more severe. And therefore, a tvul yom, if you hold it, it's only from a dead body that we're going to say you can't, then it'll include sheretz, but it's not going to include our case. So therefore, the machloka between them is just a matter of which kind of tvul yom can do it. But everyone agrees that a mechusar kippurim is like a tvul yom. That is everyone's agreeing about, and that's what we said. Rabbi said, and therefore we're just saying it's not a machloka tanaim. So that was a total tangent, just to say, is this a tanaitic debate, whether it's like a zav or not? And in fact, they say no. Everyone agrees. Again, just to be clear, a mechusar kippurim is like a zav as relates to sacrificial items, not as relates to truma. It's obviously not a zav when it comes to truma, because a mechusar kippurim can eat truma. But it is like a zav. It's like the tvul yom of a zav as relates to kodshim. And that's why it's more, right? That's why it has this level of severity that we basically say you couldn't have learned that to a tvul yom. Okay. Because again, it needs a maaseh in addition to being, right? In addition, we thought, well, okay, it needs an action. On the other hand, it's just weaker tumah, but it's not weaker tumah as relates to sacrificial items. Okay, now moving on to our last section, which we're only going to get started today. Very appropriate for Yom Kippur. And there was some content up on the site. Alana's Stein Shiur was related to Yom Kippur, as was Gefet, because of the big day kahuna that come up in these sugyot. Mechusar begadim minalan. So how do you know if a kohen, or on the next topic of the Mishna, is not with all the clothes they're supposed to be wearing, the priestly garments, and they do the avoda without the priestly garments? How do you know that that's going to disqualify the korban, right? That's how important these priestly garments are. In tomorrow's daf, very nicely, we'll get to the Yom Kippur daf to the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur. What if he wears the other clothes or some? Okay, so not just on Yom Kippur, really, just in general, the Kohen Gadol's clothes. Right, it plays a very central role. In fact, he has unique clothes for Yom Kippur also, right? There's big day lavan that he wears, and he doesn't wear his regular clothes on Yom Kippur. He changes his clothes a bunch of times. He wears sometimes regular clothes. When he goes into Kodesh Kodeshim, he doesn't wear the usual clothes. Anyway, that's a whole other topic, not for today. But mechusar b'gadim minalan. Amar Rabbi Abahu Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Umatu b'mishmei de Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Okay, either it's brought by different name, different people. De Amar Kra. Okay, this was said by Rabbi Abahu in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and also people bringing the name of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. The pasuk says, "V'chagarta otam avnei Aharon ubanav v'chavasht lehem migbaot." Right, so the clothes kohen gadol, the regular kohen was supposed to wear. V'aitan lehem kuhuna lechukat olam, and the kuhuna should be for them a rule for the long, forever. So what do they learn from here? Why juxtapose in the same pasuk? They will have the kuhuna to wear the clothes. Very simply, bisman shebigdehem alehem kunatam alehem. Ein bigdehem alehem, ein kunatam alehem. When their clothes are on them, the kuna is on them. When they're not wearing the clothes, they're not kohanim. So basically, this takes us back to they're like a zar, basically. So now they're basically like a non-kohen doing the avoda when they go in without their clothes on. It shows how important what you're wearing is. So they're not kohanim, and then there is zar. And what did we learn already? First sugya of this section, right from back when we started the Mishna, a zar who does avoda, their avoda is disqualified. So that's the pasuk. Now, I just want to remind you, when we did the zar and we did the onen, we brought a pasuk, and then we brought two kavachomers, and then we brought two psukim and two kavachomers for the onen. In this section, it's a bit of a different structure. They're going to bring a pasuk, and then they're going to say, wait, we don't learn it from there, we learn it from there. And they say, wait, we don't learn it from there, we learn it from there. Ultimately, we're going to get to 4 different psukim, and then the Gemara is going to get into this all for the next stuff, why we need all these psukim. Okay, so we're just going to start with the first question, and we're not even going to finish the question right now. What, you learn it from there? We learn it from here. It's not learned from that pasuk. It's learned from a different pasuk. What's the pasuk? Well, we're not going to see just yet, but we're going to start the Braita. Minayin l'shtuya yayin. Okay, the Braita starts off with a different topic. A kohen who's drunk, she'im avad chilel. If he does the avoda, it will be disqualified. Talmud lamal yayin v'shechar al tesht, and then it says ulavdil ben hakodesh uben hachol. So it says don't drink wine, and then it says, and you have to separate between kodesh and chol. That means if you come in drunk, then you basically done chol, and chol is also from the language of chilul, of disqualification. So that's how you learn. The kohen who does the avoda when he's drunk will disqualify the avoda. Mechusar b'gadim v'shalo rachutz yadayim v'raglayim minayin. How do you know, though, if you're missing the clothes or if you didn't wash your hands and feet? From where do you get that? And end of daf, so you'll have to wait till the next daf to get it. Luckily, it'll be up not so long after this year, so you'll be able to learn it. So what we did today, very simply, we started with the source for tvul yom. We had the source from this pasuk Yoshim Yuvalo Yechalu. We had to prove it from an imeno inyan because it wasn't so clear, right? There was no tvul yom mentioned in those pasukim, but we connected it to 2 pasukim before about the tameh, and then said, oh, it can't be tameh, so it must be tvul yom. And then they said, how do you know it's not connected to the pasuk before? The leikuchu korcha and sarated and patzkanam and all that. Why? How do you know? And then they proved it from this Gzera Sheva they had to Truma, and whatever's possible Truma is Machal Avoda also. Then we said, why do Rabba came and said, why do we need Tameh, Tvul Yom, mechusar Kippurim? And then he said, why we can't learn one from the other, and why we can't learn 2 to the third. And then we ended right on a tangent there with this whole thing about the mechusar Kippurim's dizav, kizav, dami, because we were stuck. You really maybe could have learned the third from 2, right? The tvul yom from tameh and mechusar Kippurim. And then we said, oh, but that's weaker. And then we said, no. It's not weaker, actually. It's really the same level, and that's why you can't learn them, because it really is like a zav. And then we said, is that a machloket tanaim? And then we said, no, it's not. And then we finished up with starting our first source we got to, and in the middle of the second, but we haven't seen it yet, where we get from mechusar Kippurim, and we're really in the middle of a question, because how could you learn it from the first pasuk if we have this other pasuk to teach it? With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Gemar Chatima Tova and an easy fast, and may this bring us B'sarot Tovot. And may we all have a healthy and a peaceful year ahead of us. That's it. And today's daf was short, and also tomorrow's daf is short. So that'll give you some time to catch up before Yom Kippur.